All right, well, I see it's 11 o'clock, so we can get started.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, and good morning, everyone, to all of those of you present and those joining online this morning. We are honored to gather on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, who have stewarded these lands for generations. It is our duty to recognize, respect, and honor the treaties that have shaped our shared history and continue to guide our path towards reconciliation, a commitment central to our mission and detailed in this year's report. Now, this annual report is not just a compilation of statistics. It is a testament to our office's unwavering dedication to justice and accountability. We have seen a significant increase in cases, totaling over 27,000 this year, marking one of the busiest periods in the history of our organization. This surge includes matters inherited when our mandate expanded 5 years ago, incorporating responsibilities previously held by the Child Advocate and the French Language Services Commissioner. To manage this increased workload effectively, we are unveiling a strategic plan that charts our course for the next 3 years. This plan emphasizes service excellence, the enhancement of public services, and fostering unity and empowerment within our team. As we approach our 50th anniversary in 2025, we look forward to reporting on our progress on these initiatives next year. Our work in serving Ontarians has yielded tangible results, particularly through our Children and Youth Unit, which handled nearly 8,000 cases in the past 5 years. By amplifying the voices of children and youth across Ontario, we have driven systemic improvements in care facilities and educational settings, ensuring that their rights are upheld and their concerns are addressed. Similarly, our French Language Services Unit achieved a record 511 cases this year, a testament to the confidence our interventions have inspired within the Francophone community. This represents the highest number of complaints since the role of Commissioner was established and speaks to the confidence that our work has inspired.
Our French language unit has achieved 511 cases this year, the testament to the confidence our interventions have inspired within the Francophone community. This represents the highest number of complaints since the role of Commissioner was established and speaks to the confidence of our work. The Ombudsman methodology and direct engagement, issue flagging, and proactive investigation underpins our effectiveness in ensuring compliance with the French Language Services Act. Our French Language Services Act, Carl Bouchard, will be reporting in the coming weeks in his own motion investigation into out-of-home advertising. This investigation was launched, as ombudsmen sometimes do, on his own initiative and not in response to complaint.
Our French Language Services Commissioner, Carl Bouchard, will be reporting in coming weeks on his own motion investigation into out-of-home advertising. And yet, amidst the successes, challenges persist. We continue to confront systemic issues related to access to justice, human rights in correctional facilities, transparency in municipal governance, and the delivery of developmental disability services. Specifically, we are seeing adults with developmental disabilities not getting the supports and services that they need. We are assisting people who have been deprived of access to justice by an under-resourced and overwhelmed tribunal system. We are hearing of children being housed by struggling children's aid societies in offices or trailers. We are addressing the human rights of inmates that are being violated in a corrections system that both staff and inmates say has inadequate resources and infrastructure.
Specifically, we are seeing adults with developmental disabilities not getting the supports and services they need. We are assisting people who have been deprived of access and justice by an under-resourced and overwhelmed tribunal system. We're hearing of children being housed by struggling children's aid societies in offices or trailers. We are addressing the human rights of inmates, that both staff and inmates say has inadequate resources and infrastructure.
Our ongoing investigations and advocacy for fairness aim not merely to resolve complaints, but to foster broader reforms that uphold the principles of fairness, transparency, and a respect for rights. And while I cannot tell government bodies how or where to spend money, my duty is to highlight the pain points in public services and shine a light on the hardships being caused in sectors that are under great strain and require urgent attention. In the meantime, this report showcases our commitment to achieving meaningful outcomes, as highlighted by our interventions in areas like the Landlord and Tenant Board, where systemic delays have necessitated ongoing scrutiny and advocacy for improvements, or in long-term care, where we demonstrated how crucial inspections are to keeping residents and staff safe during a public health crisis. Each recommendation implemented represents a step forward in our pursuit of justice for all Ontarians. In our top area of complaints, correctional facilities, we not only handled 4,444 cases, but we saw progress in our systemic investigations about the use of force against inmates and the use of segregation. We also sent a team of investigators to tour several facilities to observe conditions firsthand in a year of severe overcrowding. And we have resumed regular visits post-COVID. Our systemic investigation into cases of people with developmental disabilities who are being inappropriately housed in hospitals is nearly finished, and I look forward to publishing a report in the coming months. But in the meantime, our staff have worked with the relevant ministries and agencies to find suitable placements for several individuals who are hospitalized for years. Looking ahead, the road is clear, but demanding. We remain resolute in our mission to safeguard the rights of vulnerable populations, advocate for systemic improvements, and ensure that every complaint entrusted to us receives the attention that it deserves. Our role transcends mere complaint handling. It is about embedding democracy, driving change, and promoting a more equitable society.
Looking ahead, the role is clear but demanding. Why we remain resolute in our mission to safeguard the rights of vulnerable populations, advocate the systemic improvements, and ensure that every complaint entrusted to us receives the attention it deserves. Our role transcends mere complaint handling. It's about embedding democracy, driving change, and promoting a more equitable society.
In closing, I echo the sentiments of Emily O'Reilly, the European Union Ombudsman, who has aptly described the role of the Ombudsman institution as not just complaint handlers, but as architects of democracy and agents of transformation. Now, thank you all for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Why do people go for the ombudsman for help? Like, is it a government failure of some sort? Like, why do they need your help?
I think that the main reason is that because nobody else can do what we do to protect the rights and promote the fairness to Ontarians and do it effectively as we do. The Ombudsman institution has been around for over 200 years, and it's shown to be effective around the world. And what we are is a free, accessible, independent body that oversees government services. And so I think it's important in a democratic state to have a place to go that's nonpartisan, independent, and impartial, that has the power and the ability to help people navigate the democracy, to navigate the bureaucracy rather, and get their issues addressed. And it's not just addressing the problems, it's proposing solutions as well, and that's what I think this report speaks to, and I think we do that very effectively. We not only helped 27,000 people this year address their issues and get resolutions, which, by the way, we've managed to do. 57% of the cases were resolved within 2 weeks. So we're quite proud of that, but we're always striving to do better and more, and I think our strategic plan will help us get there.
Is there something that struck you as you were going through this as the most egregious thing that happened?
I would say that there are a few sectors where the people tell us, the people who work in these sectors, like the child welfare sector, like the tribunal system, and like the sector that provides supports and services to adults with developmental disabilities, they tell us they're in crisis. And the report speaks to the problems there. But we are assisting, and we're helping, as the report demonstrates. We help a lot of people get the services and the attention they need, but the systems are struggling. And so what we do is bring attention to these areas. And as I said in my remarks, urgent attention is needed in a lot of these areas.
One of the stories that struck me is this one about the group home complaints, and you had multiple young people there complaining. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Well, what I can tell you generally too is that we are not the Ombudsman just for children and youth in care. We're the Ombudsman for all children, and so our work goes across various sectors, including education and anything that children may be involved in. But I think what's important and a key part of our role is giving a voice to children and making sure that their voices are heard and their concerns are addressed. And whether it's an individual or whether it's a group, we take that very seriously. And we do a lot of very targeted outreach. We reach out directly to young people. We have an Indigenous circle team and a Black Children, Youth and Families table. We have a 2S LGBTQ team. And so we're really working hard to be accessible to youth and to address their concerns and make sure their voices are heard.
Just how bad were the conditions there, though? I think it says something about there wasn't enough food. Can you talk about that and how unusual as well? Sorry, I'm asking kind of a double-barreled question here. So the specifics and then also how unusual it is to have, young people complaining like this.
Well, it's not unusual, but it's important that their voices are heard, and so that's the service and the role that we play. And we've intervened in a lot of those cases. So whether it's food, whether it's the conditions of placement, whether it's a youth in a youth justice facility not getting their needs met, or as one of our reports dealt with, being transferred in the middle of the night without parents or support workers being advised or being moved away from their families. These are the kinds of things that we intervene in. But as I alluded to earlier, people that work in these sectors say that they're in crisis because they're lacking resources and options, whether it's for housing or care or mental health services, that type of thing. So what I hope people will see in this report is just how much help we're providing to these young people and giving a voice to their concerns.
In the jails, I was struck by a couple of the instances. Someone who was, I think, transferred to another jail couldn't get their prescription medication for 3 weeks. Someone else who was HIV positive couldn't get their meds. What's happening in situations like that? Or is it like the jail staff are not listening? Is it a paperwork problem? Or does somebody just not care and people aren't doing anything? Like how is this happening?
Well, there are a number of factors that lead to those situations. Sometimes it's policies and procedures, sometimes a lack of policies and procedures, sometimes it's a lack of adherence to policies and procedures, sometimes it's a lack of options, sometimes staff are overworked and they have too many people to deal with. So it's a number of factors that lead to those situations. But it's important, that's why oversight is so important, right? For somebody to see this, for children and youth to have a place to go and be heard and have those concerns addressed.
So for example, on the complaint about the person who didn't get their meds for 3 weeks, I understand your people helped get resolution in that case, but does anything broader happen in a situation like that where you go to the ministry and say, can you send a memo or whatever to the jails?
No, absolutely. We call that proactive ombudsmanship, and whether it's youth or whether it's adults in correctional facilities, we do that on a regular basis. We meet with ministry officials and we say, here's what we're seeing these days, here's what we're hearing, here are the trends, and quite often they are able to address those in a proactive fashion without us having to do an investigation and issue formal recommendations. So that kind of interaction, that kind of dialogue is very important.
Can you tell us a bit more about the visits to the correctional facilities? Like, what did you see? What were your concerns following those visits?
Well, I think the number one complaint in correctional facilities is health care. People not getting the appropriate health care, not getting dental treatment. Sometimes it's not being given access to culturally appropriate practices, that kind of thing. I can tell you that before COVID, I went on some of those visits, and I'll resume that in the future. But something that really shook me was my visit to Thunder Bay Jail, where the inmates were lined up on one side of the wall and the correctional officers on the other side with management, and they were both pleading with me to bring attention to the problem. And it was rare to see that kind of solidarity, and the inmates were saying, the correctional officers are doing the best they can, but there's no place to put us. They were putting some people in pantries and in broom closets, and bunks were 3 high. So those are the things that, and I met with the minister after that, and we've continued to press on that issue and share our findings. So that's why we go. That's to see these conditions firsthand. It was a visit by the former Chief Human Rights Commissioner that found Adam Capay, right, that led to our investigation and our ability to make recommendations for reform and segregation. So going there ourselves, seeing firsthand what's going on is a very important part of our role.
Another one with correctional facility, it was this youth justice center, and this young person strip searched every time he had a visit with his lawyer. Like, what happened there?
Yeah, well, sometimes, the policies and procedures are in place, but they're not followed. And so we've made recommendations on that, and it's another example of our engagement with ministries where we bring these matters to their attention, and we make sure they know that we're watching this. And what we see as improvements in the application of policies and procedures later on.
I haven't had time to dig super deep into it yet. I'm wondering, did you have any complaints regarding the assistive devices program this year? Like wheelchairs, home oxygen, those kinds of things?
Yeah, you'll appreciate that in 27,000 complaints, I don't have my finger on every one of them, so I can get you that information if you like.
I just wondered if there was anything off the top of your head.
Nothing that has come across my desk.
I saw that the OLG complaints are there, something I did a story on, people complaining about not receiving their Super Bowl winnings. What came of that?
Well, that's another instance where, we don't do a formal investigation, but we let the ministry know what we've heard, and we pass on that information, and hopefully what I recall hearing, what I was told was that procedures were changed and steps were taken to make sure that didn't happen again. So we'll see.
You talk about ways that you guys have intervened and changed things, sometimes quite quickly. Is there one that stands out as something you're most proud of?
Well, I think what I would say is I'm very proud of the ensemble of the work that the team has done and what's in this report. I think that the reforms that were the recommendations that we made to reform inspections in long-term care were very important because it was a matter of life and death for a lot of people, and we need to be sure that the long-term care system is prepared for the next pandemic. And so, significant steps have been taken, more PPE, more procedures for transfer of personnel between homes, that type of thing, and just being ready to do inspections in the middle of a pandemic is very important. And what we found was that those stopped. So I wouldn't say that's the thing I'm most proud of, but that's an example of the impact that we have in an area that's very important to people.
And some of these stories, I feel like man, anyone who's covered one of your annual reports, like it's same over and over again. For example, with the municipal government and them going in private too often or when they're not supposed to. I don't know, is this like willful in some cases? Like, oh, oops, we didn't know?
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's a matter of changes where, there are turnovers in, for example, municipal governments where people come in and, they didn't go to city council school, and so they're learning on the job, and sometimes, some councils are more attuned to their democratic responsibilities than others, and so that's why oversight always has to be there, and we are there to remind people and share best practices. And I would say for the most part, municipalities are very receptive to our best practices and to the information that we provide. And once we do an open meeting investigation, I'd say 99% of the time those recommendations are well received and implemented.
Is there a larger change that needs to be made, I don't know, to give that city council school?
Well, I think we're always making offers to share information, and we're going to continue to develop communications products and make things available. We do open meeting guides. We have a digest that is searchable with all the previous decisions and cases on that. And so we will continue to educate and inform people about their responsibilities and the information that we can provide.
Services for adults with developmental disabilities or these individuals being housed in hospitals. It seems like this is an issue that's being touched on, by other, like the FAO had in their report recently that the wait list for supported living has reached like 28,000 or more. I know I believe this is part of an investigation that you're doing, but can you speak to at all, how we've gotten to this point and what needs to happen so your office isn't the one that needs to intervene to kind of correct some of these issues that we're seeing?
Sure. Well, you may recall that in the 80s and 90s, a lot of attention was paid on closing institutions because horror stories were coming out of institutions where people's rights were violated and they were mistreated. And so the plan was to close these institutions and transfer to community care, provide services and supports in the community. But, a lot of governments never followed through on that. So those supports and services are threadbare and they're just not available. So there are not enough, for example, housing options for people with complex needs. And, those kinds of files I do see on a regular basis, and they're heartbreaking, where families are just struggling and there's nowhere for these adults, sometimes children, with complex needs. There are only so many residential facilities that will take them, and they're full, and there are waiting lists and backlogs. So we need more investments and we need more resources to be able to house these people appropriately. And so we did a report a few years ago on this, and we highlighted how that lack of housing led to people going into segregation in prisons because the correctional officers didn't have the resources or the training to handle them. They were ending up in homeless shelters, they were ending up in long-term care homes, and they were ending up in hospitals where they were languishing for long periods of time and taking up a hospital bed because they weren't sick but they were getting infections. So now we're revisiting the issue, but in a more focused way, and we're focusing just on the ones that are ending up in hospitals inappropriately for long periods of time. But the plan was decades ago to move people out of institutions and provide those services and supports in the communities, and they're inadequate and they're just not there for a lot of people.
Sorry, just on children with complex needs, because you've touched on that as well. The fact that some families are feeling that they have to surrender their kids to children's aid societies, did that surprise you for your office to be receiving calls like that or to be hearing that?
I don't know if it surprises us, but it disheartens us. right? And it touches us, and it's not easy for staff to deal with these cases because they're quite traumatic, and we see the pain that the families are in, and a lot of us are parents, and you can just imagine what it would take to drive you to the point of relinquishing the care of your child just so that they'll get support. So, look, we are vigilant. We continue to work on this, and we continue to raise the matter with government and the sector and the agencies involved. We're doing our bit, but a lot more attention needs to be paid to this area and resources provided.
Durham School Board process about a holding school for students. Would you have any specifics on that? They say it's because of growing population in the area. They would need one more school or something like that. Do you are these students without a school right now?
I'm not sure of the case you're referring to.
It's on page 45.
Okay.
They received 14 requests about they're worried about students not having a place to go after the population increase in the area.
Okay. Well, look, school boards, they're elected. We don't tell them what to do, but what we do is make sure they follow policies and procedures. So when we get complaints, whether it's a school board or a municipal council, a lot of people are unhappy with decisions, and they come to us. We don't overrule those decisions, but what we do is we make sure that there was fairness in the process and that the processes were followed. Sometimes we validate what was done and say that it was done properly, or if we find that procedures were not followed, then we offer recommendations, best practices, and constructive feedback so that those problems don't happen again.
Thinking about something that we are hearing the most complaints about lately is the government's decision on the Science Center and closing it with very little notice. Is that something your office would deal with?
No, policy decisions and the way a government decides to act is not within our. We oversee the administrative branch of government. We can sometimes deal with the impact of those, though, and we can highlight cases of unfairness when there's a negative impact of a decision. But governments are elected democratically, and they have a mandate to govern. And I'm not elected, so as I said earlier, I don't tell governments what to do or where to spend their money. But we do have an important oversight role in addressing issues of fairness, accountability, transparency, and a respect for people's rights, and that's what we're here to do.
It didn't seem like this, that you received a lot of complaints about this, but there was mention about some school boards that were charging newcomers tuition fees for their kids. And there was a mention in there about the ministry maybe kind of taking a look at that. Do you have any idea kind of what's happening with that, or if any changes are being made?
I don't have an update on that. All I can tell you is we're engaged, and I've written to the ministry, and we're waiting for a response. So hopefully we'll have some news on that next year.
We do have callers on the line, so please stand by.
Okay.
Question from Emily Pelletier from Litera Newspapers. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Dubé. Can you hear me? Bonjour. Yes. Good morning. I'm interested in the tenant and landlord board. I heard that there were like all the judges that were appointed. I cannot answer to this question. I did not evaluate the nomination. I'm not able to comment on the nomination, unfortunately. Okay. Question. Follow-up question. It seems that there is a new problem, and this is the increase of the complaints. Do you have inaudible? I don't have this information on hand. Thank you. You can make a written demand, and we can provide you with all the information that we have on file, but I don't have them right now.
Okay.
Next question comes from Alan Hale at Queen's Park. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. So I was just wondering, you were mentioning in your comments about the correctional facilities that they're putting people in pantries and like just trying to find room for people. And I'm just wondering if you are worried at all that exacerbated by the like bail reforms to keep people in pre-trial custody longer, and the government's like calls for like longer and minimum sentences for like car theft. Are you worried that such measures could make the overcrowding worse in correctional facilities?
Well, look, our announcements and recommendations are evidence-based, and I really, can't say that I've studied all of the causes for this situation. When I was talking about the Thunder Bay Jail, that was a few years ago, and there is a new one being built. So that's what I would say to that.
Okay, and they are.
You mentioned bail reform. I think what's important to remember is that most of the people in the provincial jails have not been convicted of a crime, and most of them are awaiting trial, so they're presumed innocent. So that is why the need to provide better housing and care and supports is even more pressing. No, I think that's something that I mentioned just now when I was talking about my visit to Thunder Bay Jail a few years ago, and that's what the inmates were telling me. Yeah, that's not in the report.
Okay.
So.
Just in case my colleagues on the French side would like something about a little bit more on the French services complaints, if you could just give a kind of general answer about just how bad it is this year, en français.
Non, c'est juste pour dire que nous avons reçu.
We have received 511 cases. The French Services Unity has received 511 cases, which is the highest number. And I think that this proves the confidence in our work. If you read the annual report of the Commissar for last year, this proves the results that we have obtained for Francophones in the province, the changes that we have triggered, whether it's the Amber Alert and more planification concerning the government, concerning the hiring of Francophones in the public function. I think we are starting to have an impact on services in French.
Dispensary situation that was reported to you, not in the report. Like, no, you didn't have a case on that. Nobody made a case.
No, we documented the conditions and we wrote about it in previous reports. That was it was a few years ago that I did that visit to Thunder Bay. No, we were quite vocal about it, and we were on social media, and I met with the minister afterwards to talk about my shock about the conditions at Thunder Bay. Yeah. All right, well, if there's no other questions, I just wish you all a good summer. Thank you very much. Take care.